You're nothing but a mistake in his will, a clerical error with a face. She thought Elena was disposable, but some errors fight back. Watch how the truth rewrote everything. Like, share and comment 1 if you believe justice always finds a way. I wasn't invited to my own father's will reading. My sister made sure of it. I found out from a secondhand whisper at the grocery store. Mrs. Halpern, our elderly neighbor who never forgot a face or a funeral, leaned over her cart and said, "Such a shame you weren't there, dear. Meredith handled it so efficiently." I smiled tightly, but inside something cracked. The house felt colder than I remembered. It had always creaked, like it held secrets in its wooden bones. But now the silence was sharper, watchful. The scent of aged paper and cedar oil greeted me as I stepped inside. My heels clicked faintly across the hallway as I made my way to the library, the only room my father called sacred. He used to say, "If someone ever questions what I stood for, send them to my shelves." My hand hesitated at the door. I hadn't been back to Willowridge since before Dad got sick. Meredith had conveniently taken over caretaking duties then, or so she claimed. What she really did was manage his schedule, his pills, and eventually, his visitors. The library door groaned as I pushed it open. Dust motes swirled in the late afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. Books still lined the walls. First editions, legal volumes, historical epics, all in their rightful places. But there was something off. The armchair by the fireplace was missing its pillow. A paperweight that always sat centered on Dad's desk had been nudged to the edge, like someone had rifled through the drawers and left in a hurry. Dad wasn't careless. Meredith was. I walked to the bookshelf closest to the window, where he kept personal files in a locked cabinet. It was empty. Not even the familiar vanilla-scented envelopes he preferred. My throat tightened. I knelt, checking beneath the lowest shelf, where he once told me he stored boring tax things. But nothing. Meredith had been thorough, or so she thought. I sat cross-legged on the carpet, letting the hush of the room settle over me. Somewhere in here was the man who raised me, who read me case law like bedtime stories, who let me write in the margins of his favorite novels. The man who had told me on a cool October evening years ago, "This house will always be yours, no matter what paper says." And yet, the paper said otherwise. Meredith had told the family that Dad updated the will shortly before his death, leaving everything, the house, the land, the trust, to her. There was no discussion, no reading with legal counsel, just an announcement over dinner, casual as if she were assigning chores. I'd wanted to scream. But instead, I waited, watched, let her underestimate me. My eyes drifted to the hearth. I remembered how Dad once hid a Christmas gift under the floorboard just in front of it. A puzzle box he said only I could solve. He'd laughed when I found it in under an hour. "Elena," he said, "you see things others miss." I moved quickly, dragged the rug back. The wood was warped slightly. Nothing most would notice, but I saw it. My fingers pried at the edge of the board, splinters biting into my skin. The board groaned, then lifted. Beneath it, dust and shadows. And something solid. My heart pounded as I reached inside and pulled out a worn leather folder, bound with twine. I unwrapped it slowly, reverently. And then, beneath the loose floorboard in the library, I found the real deed. Wills can be changed. Land records can't. Janet stirred her coffee absently, her eyes flickering toward the scanned image glowing on her laptop screen. We were tucked into the corner booth of a sleepy cafe in downtown Willowridge, where the soft clink of ceramic cups and murmured conversations made a curious backdrop to the quiet storm brewing between us. She tapped the screen once, then looked up at me, her tone low. "It's real." A single breath escaped me, part relief, part disbelief. I leaned closer, scanning the crisp, digitized edges of the old document I'd unearthed from the library floorboard. The Calloway estate deed, signed and notarized, time-stamped 2 years ago. My name, Gregory Calloway's signature, filed, Pre-registered with the county clerk's office. Not provisional, not revoked, untouched. I blinked, suddenly aware of how my hands had started to shake. Janet noticed. She always noticed. I ran the chain of title just to be thorough, she said, switching tabs to a list of entries. Your father signed it over to you outright. No life estate, no reversion clauses, the house, the land, everything. It's clean. She paused. What's strange is, there's no record of a rescindment. If your sister claims there's a newer version, she's either hiding it or it doesn't exist. A dry laugh escaped me, so she tried to erase me by just announcing it. Paper leaves trails, Elena, but most people don't bother to check the ink. That sounded like something Dad would say. My throat tightened again. I reached into my bag and pulled out the leather folder, placing it on the table. Janet studied it like a museum relic, cautious but reverent. Do you remember what he said when he signed it? She asked softly. I nodded, gaze fixed on the twine still coiled like a secret. He didn't explain much, just said, "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." He smiled, like it was a joke only I'd understand. Janet leaned back, processing. Her usually sharp expression softened for a moment, just enough for concern to slip through. My dad's been acting strange, she said. Martin. He used to call me into every probate case for a second opinion. But ever since Meredith dropped by the office last summer, he's different, guarded, almost deferential to her. I raised an eyebrow. Your dad and my sister? That's unsettling. Janet hesitated, then nodded. I don't know what was said, but not long after that, he told me to stay out of anything involving your family. Said Meredith had it under control. I looked at her, silent. Which is exactly why I'm in it now, she added, voice firmer. A silence settled between us. Not the uncomfortable kind, the kind that asked us both to weigh what we were getting into. She finally spoke again, almost reluctant. If this deed stands, the will won't mean much in court. I knew that. But hearing it aloud made the stakes tangible. I remembered sitting on the back porch 2 years ago, a mug of tea in my hands, watching late autumn leaves drift down across the garden. Dad had walked out without a word, slipped an envelope onto the table, and joined me in silence. No lecture, no ceremony, just the creak of the chair beside me. He'd tapped the envelope. You won't need to fight for this, he said. But if you ever do, fight smart. And then he'd change the subject. To the weather, to the garden, to a new book he was reading. As if he hadn't just handed me the key to everything. Back in the cafe, Janet reached for her phone and opened her calendar. You need 3 things, she said, already typing. A scanner to digitize this properly, a pen to sign the petition I'm drafting, and 1 appointment with the county registrar. I looked at her. The adrenaline, the disbelief, the betrayal. It all faded for a moment, replaced by something quieter. Resolve. I didn't need revenge. I needed a scanner, a good pen, and 1 appointment. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need permission. Just the facts. The brass door handle of Hale and Hale gleamed under the lobby lights, polished like the lie my sister had been telling. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, the scent of leather-bound books and lemon polish thick in the air. Mahogany-paneled walls loomed like silent judges. I took a slow breath, heels tapping crisply on the parquet floor as I followed the sound of voices. Martin Hale's office was just as I remembered it, a cathedral to old-school law. Shelves packed with legal volumes, a hulking desk that seemed designed to intimidate, and family photographs neatly framed behind his chair. There was Janet as a teenager, holding a gavel in a mock trial. A smiling Martin and his late wife beneath an archway of roses. A younger version of me had once found this room awe-inspiring. Not anymore. I stepped in unannounced, letting the door swing shut behind me with a firm click. Meredith was already there, seated in a navy sheath dress, legs crossed too tightly. Martin stood at his desk, gesturing toward a file mid-sentence. He blinked. Elena? Don't let me interrupt, I said evenly, holding the leather folder in one hand. I just thought it was time we all looked at the same facts. Meredith's head whipped toward me. You can't just walk in. I just did. Janet was there too, seated quietly in the corner. She didn't speak, but her eyes met mine. Steady. Ready. Martin cleared his throat, his demeanor slipping a notch toward wary. What's this about? I stepped forward and placed the folder on the edge of his desk. It's about this. A deed. Signed, notarized, and recorded. From Gregory Calloway to me. Dated 2 years ago. He hesitated. You're claiming the property? I'm not claiming anything. I'm showing you what already belongs to me. His brow furrowed as he untied the twine and unfolded the paper. He scanned the document quickly, then walked to his desk computer and typed. The seconds ticked by, each keystroke like a hammer tapping cracks into the smooth surface of Meredith's confidence. She leaned forward. That's not the final version. Dad changed his mind. He told me. Then there should be paperwork, Janet said quietly. Is there? Meredith's lips pressed into a thin line. Martin adjusted his glasses, staring at the screen. He clicked once, then again. A long pause. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its earlier assurance. This document has never been revoked. It's the last deed on record. Clean title, no encumbrances. Meredith stood abruptly, the chair legs scraping the floor. He didn't mean for that to stand. He was confused near the end. You know that, Martin. You said it yourself. He didn't answer. He just kept staring at the screen, as if it might change if he blinked hard enough. Janet rose then, slowly. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes burned. Dad, she said gently, we talked about this. About trust and how it's earned, not inherited. Martin looked at her, and for the first time I saw uncertainty ripple across his features. I didn't press. I didn't need to. The room was already tilting. I turned to Meredith. She was pale now, her mouth tightening with words she couldn't quite shape. You made sure I wasn't at the will reading, I said quietly. You told everyone it was done, settled. But you didn't settle it. You tried to rewrite it without a pen. You think this is over? She snapped, a little too loud. No, I said. I think it's beginning. She opened her mouth to fire back, but no sound came out. Her throat worked once. Twice. And just like that, for once, silence served me. They thought Dad took the truth to the grave. They were wrong. The smell of old paper and varnish clung to the lower level of Hale and Hale's archives like a ghost of unfinished business. Rows of beige cabinets lined the walls, each drawer labeled in blocky, fading letters. Dust curled in the slivers of fluorescent light. Janet stood beside me, sleeves rolled, her jaw tight. This floor is rarely accessed, she muttered, tugging open a drawer with a dull metal screech. Even I needed override codes. Martin never lets assistants down here. Because this is where secrets go to nap, I said. Janet didn't smile. She opened another drawer and began flipping through files, methodically, her fingers scanning like radar. My own hands were searching, slower, less practiced. But I was searching for something else entirely. The feeling. The tug. And then Janet stopped. A faint click, then a creak. This one's different, she said, tapping the back of the cabinet. There's a false panel. She reached in, nudged, and something gave way. A shallow compartment slid open. Inside, wrapped in waxy paper, was a small bundle of documents. And something else. A flat, matte black flash drive tucked beneath them. She passed it to me like a relic. The documents were mostly drafts, half-finished. One in particular stood out. A note in Gregory's handwriting, dated just 4 weeks before his passing. It wasn't signed, but the ink was firm. Not frail. It read, I worry Meredith may be forcing something not mine. I told Martin I needed more time, but she's already asking about the will, about Elena. This isn't how it should end. Janet exhaled, slow and cold. He had doubts. I turned the flash drive over in my hand, then followed her to the small AV desk in the corner. She plugged it in. Static. Then a soft click. And then my father's voice. If you're hearing this, Martin, I suppose things didn't go quietly. The room went still. His tone was calm but tired, the way he spoke after long days in the garden when the sky began to fade. I made my decision. Willow Ridge goes to Elena. She stayed. She understood what it cost to keep this place alive. Meredith doesn't understand roots. She sees walls, square footage, power, but it's not about that. There was a pause, a sigh. I know there will be pushback, maybe even fury, but I need this to stand. Not for fairness, for clarity. Let the silence speak if words fail. Then nothing. Janet didn't look at me. She just pressed her lips together, her hands folded over one another too tightly. We climbed back up the stairs with the flash drive tucked safely into a folder. Martin was in his office, the blinds drawn, his fingers steepled. He looked up as we entered, first at me, then at his daughter. His face already said too much. "You knew?" Janet said, quiet but sharp. Martin hesitated. "I suspected. He gave me the file. I thought it was a draft, that he'd change his mind. But he didn't. No." He stared at the grain of his desk. I ignored his hesitation. I thought I was helping the family avoid a fight. I inserted the flash drive and pressed play. Gregory's voice filled the room. This time, Martin didn't flinch. He listened to every word, and when it ended, the silence weighed more than the recording. "Let the record show," I said. He never changed his mind. Martin's lips parted, but nothing came out. The quiet was long, not hostile, not yet. Janet crossed her arms, her stance no longer just defensive, it was verdict-like. She turned her gaze on her father. "You have one chance to fix this before it all goes public." She wanted an audience. So did I. The Willow Ridge estate had never felt colder. Not from the winter air that clung to the windows, but from the way people paused mid-sentence when I entered. Candles flickered along the mantels, casting soft light on a sea of solemn faces. The portraits watched us all, their painted gazes heavy with generations of judgment. Meredith stood near the hearth, framed like a portrait herself. Hair set, dress charcoal gray, voice steady and sweet as she spoke. Dad was a difficult man, yes, but I think in the end he wanted peace. And I've tried my best, truly, to honor that peace. She looked out at the room, eyes gleaming, voice catching just right. When he left Willow Ridge to me, I knew it wasn't about property. It was about legacy. I let the silence sit for a heartbeat longer than it wanted. Then I stepped forward. "Legacy deserves clarity," I said, unfolding the folder in my hands. Meredith's smile froze, a half step back, subtle but visible. "I wasn't planning to speak tonight," I added, "but when truth is this loud, it demands company." Janet was beside me, hands folded, gaze calm. Martin Hale stood farther back, alone, leaning against the sideboard like he'd aged a decade since the last time he stepped foot here. I held up the deed. Dated, registered, untouched. This, I set it down on the table between us, was signed months before Dad passed. A rustle moved through the room. "There's more," I said. I slipped the flash drive from my pocket. Janet had brought a small portable speaker. Simple, clinical, no fanfare. She plugged it in. A click. Static. Then his voice. "She may not be flashy," Dad said, "but she's the one who will keep this place alive." The sound swept through the room like wind through dry leaves. People stilled. Some blinked. Others simply stared. "She stayed," his voice continued. "She understood what this place meant when it didn't look like a gift." Martin stepped forward. His voice was low, deliberate. That recording is real. So is the deed. Neither has ever been revoked. And just like that, the air changed. Someone gasped. An uncle looked down. An aunt clutched her scarf. Meredith's mouth opened, but what came out was a tangled, unformed protest. He was ill. He didn't finish the sentence, I said. But she didn't. Her eyes darted to Martin, then to the door, then back to the circle of relatives whose expressions had shifted from reverence to uncertainty. And then she left. No tantrum. No final plea. Just heels clicking against the hardwood, faster with every step. I turned to the room. Not to gloat. Just to say it. I don't need applause. I just needed this house to remember who it belongs to. It wasn't silence that followed. It was the sound of something breaking. Quietly, gently. And from just behind me, I heard the whisper. Soft, but piercing. We believed her. Because she told the story louder. I didn't win. I reclaimed. The clerk's pen scratched against paper with a quiet finality that didn't need celebration. December light filtered through the frosted window, casting soft patterns on the linoleum floor. I sat in a plastic chair across from Martin Hale, watching him finish the notarization. He didn't say much, just handed over the signed copy, his eyes steadier than I expected. You're listed alongside your father now, he said, as it should have been. Janet stood nearby, not speaking either, though her presence felt like a shield. She had offered to stay through the whole process, but as I reached for the deed, she nodded and slipped out quietly. Some things, even allies know to leave alone. It was done. After weeks of tension, revelation, and fractured trust, it came down to a file folder and a stamp, neatly sealed, irrefutable. The snow was falling when I returned to Willow Ridge, the kind of snow that didn't stick but softened edges, like powdered sugar on the stone steps, on the iron gate, on the roof that Dad and I once patched together with stubborn hands and a crooked ladder. Inside, the fireplace was lit for the first time in months. It didn't roar, but it glowed, low and steady. The house breathed differently, not lighter but less wary, as if it had been waiting. I found the letter on the study desk. A single sheet. Meredith's name on the envelope in ink too neat to be her own. She hadn't signed it with love, just with her name. Elena, I underestimated you. Again, I won't ask for forgiveness and I won't fight this. You and I, we saw the same father, but from different sides. Keep the house. Keep the name. Do with them what you will. Meredith. No apology, but something quieter. A kind of retreat that didn't scream defeat, just an ending. I folded the letter and slipped it into the drawer beneath the window. The study hadn't changed much. The lamp still leaned slightly left. The leather chair creaked the same way when I sat down. On the corner shelf sat the photo album. It had been there all along, I realized. I pulled it down, dust lifting like memory from the spine. Inside, pages of faded moments. My first bike, a snowman with 3 buttons, Gregory Calloway on the roof, holding a wrench and grinning like a kid. Me at his feet, tongue sticking out, pointing at the wrong screw. I smiled before I knew I had. I never wanted to replace you, I whispered, my hand resting on the edge of his photo. Just to honor what you left me. No one answered, but the air felt warmer. I closed the album and placed it back where it belonged. Not hidden, not framed, just resting in plain sight. The house didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It feels like home. Snow settled into silence outside, layering the hedges and trees around Willow Ridge in soft outlines. From the study window, the world looked untouched, like a page waiting for a new sentence. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a trespasser in my own home. The flames in the fireplace danced quietly behind the screen. I stood, stretched, and walked through the hallway with bare feet against warm wood. The heating had kicked on earlier. Janet had insisted on having it serviced properly last week. No more pretending this place is a mausoleum, she'd said, her voice more decisive than ever. The house listened better now. Doors didn't groan. The plumbing didn't sigh. The air no longer carried tension in the corners like a held breath. What had once been cold, inherited space had begun to respond again, like a relationship being mended. In the kitchen, I opened a drawer at random. Spoons, old ones Dad probably hadn't touched in years. There was a chipped mug with a faded logo from his first architecture firm, Calloway and Stern. I held it in my hands, felt the slight groove where his thumb must have rested. There were things in this house that had outlived their function, but not their meaning. Outside, headlights pulled into the driveway. I recognized Janet's car. I opened the door before she had to knock. She stepped inside, shaking snow off her scarf, holding a cardboard box. "You left this in my office," she said, lifting it slightly. "Figured you might want it now." I took it, placed it on the counter, and raised an eyebrow. "It's nothing dramatic," she said. "Some of your dad's files, the ones you didn't look through." I opened the lid slowly. Folders, a few photographs, a postcard, yellowed and bent at the corners, and on top, an old cassette tape in a plastic sleeve labeled in Gregory's neat block letters, "To play when you're ready." My throat tightened. Janet didn't speak. She simply sat down at the dining table, hands wrapped around a mug I poured for her without asking. Silence settled between us, the kind that didn't demand filling. "I'm not sure I ever will be," I said finally, holding the tape. She nodded. "That's okay. Some stories don't need to be told out loud." We talked eventually. About the future of the estate. About putting Gregory's name on the local architecture archive wall. Something he'd never asked for but always deserved. About her decision to take a more independent role at her firm. Martin had stepped back, officially. The conflict had worn him down in ways I suspected he hadn't anticipated. Or maybe he had. "I think he's proud of you," I said softly. Janet looked down at her cup. "He didn't say that. He didn't have to." She smiled, and in that moment I saw in her the same steady fire that had carried me through those first uncertain days. The woman who had believed me when no one else would. The one who hadn't flinched at digging through paperwork instead of rumors. Later, after she left, I found myself back in the study. The tape sat on the desk like it had always been there. I didn't play it. Not that night. Some truths could wait. Instead, I walked to the window. Snow still fell. Across the lawn, the trees that Gregory had planted decades ago stood firm, bare but rooted. I thought of Meredith, of her silence, her absence, her letter without apology. I didn't hate her. I no longer needed to. She had her version of the story. I had mine. But the house remembered everything. And tonight, it remembered me. The morning light spilled across the hallway floors, amber and clean, like the kind of sunrise you don't notice until you live somewhere long enough to expect it. I sat on the old porch swing Gregory had never replaced, just tightened every spring. It creaked softly beneath me, not in complaint. But like a song, it still remembered how to hum. In my lap was the photo album I'd found in the study, the same one from Chapter 6. I hadn't looked beyond the first few pages before. Now I let it unfold. Snapshots from another time. Dad in a flannel shirt, holding a paintbrush and a half smile. Me, 10 years old, pretending to hammer a nail into the porch rail while he patiently corrected my grip. The willow tree behind us had been smaller then. So had I. So had the lies. And yet, something in the pictures felt untouched by the later betrayals. Some essence had survived us all. I ran a finger across the plastic sleeve of the last photo. Gregory, sitting alone on the porch steps, looking toward the horizon. I remembered that day. He didn't know I was watching from inside. I hadn't spoken to him that evening. I'd assumed there would be time. Behind me, the house was warm again. The gas lines had been inspected. The boiler bled of air. Janet had even replaced the warped floorboard in the upstairs hall. And I, without ceremony, had hung the framed deed on the wall near the kitchen. Not to boast, to remember. There was no victory dance here, only presence. The kind of quiet presence my father had mastered, until Meredith mistook it for weakness. I rose, walking barefoot down the steps into the cold grass. The willow's roots cracked the lawn in subtle lines now. I crouched beside one, touching the bark. Then I heard it. A voice. Small, not imagined. "Miss Calloway?" I stood quickly. A boy, no more than 10, peered through the gate. He was bundled in an oversized coat. I recognized the face. Marcy's grandson from the next lot over. She used to bring me vegetables when I was a teenager. The boy stepped back a little when I turned. "Sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to, my grandma said this used to be a haunted house." I raised an eyebrow. "Did she now?" "Well, not ghosts, just secrets," he added. I smiled. She wasn't wrong. He hesitated. "Is it yours now?" "It always was," I said, "but now it knows I'm staying." He nodded slowly, like a child trying to digest something beyond his years. "I saw you fixing the windows." I paused. "You were spying?" "No, just watching. You looked like you were fixing more than the house." I laughed then, genuinely, and motioned for him to come closer. "What's your name?" "Elias," he said, walking up. "Want to see the inside?" His eyes lit up. "Really?" I nodded, but only the study, no ghosts allowed. Inside, I led him past the hall, the photo album still open on the porch. He moved carefully, like he was afraid to break something invisible. I showed him the old desk, the record player, the case of books I hadn't yet dusted. He pointed at a model on the shelf. "Did your dad build that?" "Yes, for a library that was never built." "He was an architect?" "He was more than that, but yes." Elias looked at the model again. "Do you think he'd want someone else to finish it?" The question landed harder than I expected. "I think," I said slowly, "he'd want someone to understand why he started it." He nodded. We stood in silence for a while. Then he whispered, "If it's not haunted anymore, you should plant something." I turned to him. "What do you mean?" "My grandma says places heal faster when things grow in them." I smiled. "Does she now?" He shrugged. "She's not wrong." Later that day, after Elias had gone and the sun dipped low again, I pulled the dusty tarp off a forgotten bench beside the garage. Underneath was a small box of seeds, ones Dad had meant to plant along the back wall. I'd always thought he'd just forgotten. Maybe he had. Or maybe he'd saved it for the right season. The ground was cold, but not frozen. I dug carefully, kneeling in old jeans and an old sweater that still smelled faintly of cedar. I planted lavender. Not for him. For here. Because the house, too, deserved something new. And because I was done building walls. Justice didn't roar in a courtroom or arrive with applause. It whispered through paper trails, silence, and one woman's refusal to be erased. What was stolen wasn't just land, but the truth. And piece by piece, she took it back. Because when betrayal hides behind law and legacy, only the brave turn grief into proof, and silence into testimony. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and comment your thoughts. Type 1 if you felt the weight of justice, too.